Hi everyone, my name is Alex Cleveringa and the topic of my current research project is optimizing fertilizer recommendations using absolute yield and nonlinear mixed models. I will quickly explain why this research matters, how recommendations are currently made, and some benefits of incorporating the ideas in my title to this process. There are negative consequences to the increasing fertilizer use observed over time. Water quality has been impacted from Des Moines to the Gulf of Mexico, and fertilizer use is one of producers' largest expenses, so optimizing its use is of great value to them. I'll first describe the current methods used to creating fertilizer recommendations. Soil tests are first correlated to determine if increasing test values correlate with increasing yield. Yield here is relative, where the highest yield at each site is 100%, and lower yields are a percentage of those maximums. A critical soil test concentration is determined, shown here in red, below which we should expect a response to fertilizer and above which we should not expect a response. Then the test is calibrated, so soils within a certain test category are given different fertilizer rates to see how much it takes for them to reach maximum yield, giving the table shown. There are a number of weaknesses with relative yield that have been widely ignored by the methods and people who have developed fertilizer recommendations, which we now have the procedures and computing power to address. Relative yield doesn't transfer to economics. The maximum yield is poorly defined. Transforming them to relative yield introduces structural bias, and there are very few statistical tests we can use for further analysis. Generally, relative yield is good for communication, not for analysis. Relative yield is a shortcut we no longer need. I will analyze my dataset using both absolute and relative yield to their respective ends and compare the differences. The benefit of using nonlinear models is that they are common in analyzing biological data, and they produce biologically meaningful parameters. I have provided a few models as examples in this table, so you have an idea of what they are. I'll go more in depth now from the dataset I've been working with. The linear plateau function is the most common model for potassium recommendations. In this equation, there's a linear response up to a breakpoint, beyond which is a flat straight line. So the parameters that define this function with their meaning are the intercept A, the expected yield without fertilizer, the slope B, the amount of yield increased expected per unit of fertilizer until you reach a rate of XS, above which you don't see a yield response. With mixed models, I can also introduce and test covariates or other parameters that I think will influence yield and distribute the residual error into fixed and random effects, providing more accuracy and specificity to my model. I look forward to talking to anyone interested in learning more about this or contributing in some way. Thanks.
Rapid urbanization in much of the developing world has led to a sharp increase in the demand for animal protein. As this trend continues, experts predict to observe a 72% increase in the demand for animal protein in 2050 compared to the demand in 2013. Even though the efficiency of global agriculture practices has improved significantly to meet this growing demand, the land, water, and feed resources available to produce animal protein are increasingly limited. Livestock production releases 7.1 gigatons of carbon dioxide every year, which accounts for 14.5% of the global human-caused greenhouse gas emissions. We need new methods to improve the land efficiency and reduce greenhouse gas emission and resource consumption associated with animal protein production if we intend to continue meeting the growing protein demand. Single-cell protein from the cultivation of microorganisms has been suggested as a source of protein for animal feed production. One possibility is the use of carbon dioxide sequestered from corn ethanol plants as a source of carbon to produce single-cell protein via gas fermentation. In fact, producing 1 metric ton of single-cell protein could intercept and utilize 1.84 metric tons of carbon dioxide, significantly reducing emissions compared to traditional animal and vegetable protein sources. Cupriovetus necator, or C. necator, is a suitable microorganism for single-cell protein, and it grows on a mixture of hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon dioxide gas. They utilize hydrogen as an energy source and carbon dioxide as a carbon source. To date, C. necator has only been produced at the laboratory scale because the low solubility and explosive nature of the gaseous substrate has hindered production scale-up. To overcome the mass transfer limitations associated with conventional gas fermentation and to eliminate the explosion hazard associated with this gaseous mixture, we propose to utilize a novel dual spray contacting system. One chamber of the dual contactor will solubilize oxygen and carbon dioxide gas, and the other chamber will solubilize hydrogen gas. The two aqueous streams will be mixed with ammonia and mineral media to provide the appropriate ratios of gases for production of C. necator. By dissolving the gases in an aqueous stream prior to mixing, we hypothesize that the explosion hazard will be mitigated. To evaluate this new system, we will be investigating the improved mass transfer and safety characteristics of the dual contacting system. We will evaluate the growth characteristics of the bacteria compared to conventional gas fermentation, and we will determine the economic viability of single-cell protein as animal feed when produced by this method. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Kyle DeLong and I am a master's student in agricultural meteorology with Dr. Brian Hornbuckle. Today I'll be talking about the validation of soil moisture products like satellites and reanalysis models within the U.S. Corn Belt, but most importantly, when farmers are making key management decisions. Therefore, my motivation is to help improve the efficiency of farmers' day-to-day operations, because farmers are constantly thinking about things like insurance plant dates, soil properties, and most importantly, soil moisture, and when they can get their equipment out into the field. Therefore, it is important to evaluate these soil moisture products on a farmers-based timeline when these key management decisions are being made. However, if our current best ability to estimate soil moisture is poor, then what will that say about our ability to predict it? The focus of this study is at a unique in situ area in central Iowa called the South Fork Core Validation Site. This site is maintained by the USDA and has 20 stations reporting soil moisture at least at the 5 centimeter depth. Because this site is in the Central District of Iowa, the USDA also provides crop progress and condition data for the whole district. Items like planting, emergence, and corn maturity are provided in terms of percentage reached for that district. With little surprise, corn is the dominant crop in this area and therefore will be the focus of this study. The key feature to this study, though, is that we are validating our soil moisture estimators on a mostly non-calendar based timeline. That's because crops and the seasons don't obey the months and days on a calendar, and because crops have a great impact on soil properties, including soil moisture, our focus will be on their progress. This leads us to the development of the new validation timeline. This includes 4 segments to our growing season, where first, we have farmers are being active in their field without anything growing, which is followed by when farmers are still active in the field but now crops are growing. Then there's little to no traffic from the farmer in the field after canopy closure. And then our last segment, when farmers are performing activities after harvest. The actual products being validated on this new timeline include our satellites of SMAP, SMOS, and MEDOP, or the instrument ASCAP, and our reanalysis models of MERA2, NAR, and WEB. That's all I have for now, but please feel free to join me later today at my talk to discuss more about this new validation approach. Thank you.
Hi everyone, this is Mutahara. I'm a PhD student at Industrial, in Manufacturing Systems Engineering at ISU, and today I'm going to talk about my research, which is supply chain design for chemicals from biomass. CO2 emissions from human activity are causing climate change, and to reduce the carbon footprint, the chemical industry will need to switch to renewable energy and replace petroleum with biomass. So we're going to have greener materials with the help of greener energy. And electrochemistry has shown promise for producing chemicals from biomass. The objective of our project is to understand and address the scientific and technological barriers to an electrochemical process for the distributed manufacturing of high-value monomers and performance advantage polymers from biomass. To do so, we need to design a proper supply chain from the very first part, which is related to biomass cultivation, into the very end part, which is related to demand zones in the market. This is a simple network for our supply chain. In each step, as you can see, we need to define our known parameters and we need to define our decision variables. For example, in cultivation sites, we know about the cultivation cost, harvesting cost, and maximum available lands. And we need to decide about land devoted to cultivation and amount of harvested biomass. So we need to decide about devoted lands for biomass cultivation, the amount of biomass harvested in cultivation sites, the amount of harvested biomass transported from cultivation site to pre-processing facilities, amount of densified biomass transported from pre-processing facility to conversion facilities, and amount of chemicals produced in conversion facilities and transport to demand zones. And also we need to decide about location of each facilities. And our objective here is to minimize the total annual cost, which would categorized into fixed facilities cost, biomass production cost, pre-processing costs, chemical production cost, and transportation costs. Of course, in each step, we will face some constraints which need to be taken into account. For example, in cultivation sites, we need to respect limits on available land and the limit on yield in each time stage, the conservation of biomass, and we should pay attention to the inventory balance at each time stage. Our next step would be formulating a deterministic optimization model and then adding uncertainties in order to make it more realistic and then finding a solution procedure to find our model.
The average American diet is a diet that is high in red and processed meats. As a result, Americans generally consume high amounts of saturated fat and sodium, which increases one's risk for many chronic diseases, such as heart disease and cancer. This is of growing concern as 60% of Americans have one chronic disease and 40% have two or more. In addition to harming human health, the average American diet is not environmentally sustainable, mainly due to the high content of beef and other animal protein foods. Beef is the most resource-intensive protein food, and animal protein foods in general are more environmentally demanding compared to plant protein foods. As such, the vegan and vegetarian diets, which completely exclude animal products, have significantly lower carbon footprints and land use requirements. While there are obvious benefits to the adoption of the vegan and vegetarian diets, the adoption of the following dietary patterns can be quite challenging for consumers. Consumers are balancing multiple factors when making their food choices, such as price, taste, convenience, health, and environmental sustainability. Unfortunately, health and environmental sustainability are the least important factors for most consumers. Additionally, consumers are reluctant to fully eliminate animal protein foods from their diets. For these reasons, it is not feasible to promote a vegan or a vegetarian diet to the public. Instead, it may be better to recommend simple swaps, such as suggesting consumers swap beef for pork, poultry, or plant-based protein foods. This suggestion may be happily accepted by some due to growing concern in climate change. However, consumers lack awareness regarding sustainable food choices. One way to overcome this barrier is the use of a food label that denotes the food's relative environmental sustainability, which we would call an eco-label. In my research, I aim to use virtual reality to evaluate the effectiveness of eco-labels versus a red meat reduction suggestion in a restaurant setting. Virtual reality is an immersive computer simulation that mimics any desired environment. It is a cost-effective way to model restaurants, and it can even capture sounds along with the sights of the environment. We selected a restaurant due to the growing rate of food consumed away from home. Another reason is that we predict that these strategies may be more effective in a restaurant setting. At a restaurant, consumers only have to consider the price, taste, nutrition, convenience, and sustainability for one menu item, compared to a grocery store when the consumer has to consider all of those factors for food that will last for multiple meals over the course of multiple days. Therefore, sustainability may be a more important factor for determining the food choice in a restaurant setting due to the decreased amount of food options. Through this research, we will determine if an eco-label or a red meat reduction suggestion could promote the adoption of a healthier and more sustainable diet. This research can then be brought to policymakers and industry to promote the adoption of one of these strategies.